Good morning. I should say good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am so pleased to welcome, excuse me, I'm excited to be with you tonight and have the chance to introduce our guest speakers from Pikes Peak Chapter of Credit Unions. The Pikes Peak Chapter of Credit Unions is an organized, dedicated giving back to our community. They are cooperative of local credit unions and serve El Paso County and surrounding areas. The chapter is passionate about financial literacy and believes everyone benefits from having a better understanding of financial decision making. Please join me in welcoming Emma Protznick from Ent Credit Union, Todd Cummins from Canvas Credit Union to speak about budgeting and credit building. And we also have Zach, who will be sharing with us today. If you have the opportunity, please mute yourselves and keep your cameras on during the duration of this presentation and change your name so that we know who you are for attendance. Thank you.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Let me get our slides pulled up for today. And I'll pass it over to Todd to introduce himself first while I'm getting all set up.
Cool. Thank you, Emma. Well, my name is Todd Cummins. I work at Canvas Credit Union. I'm a director of retail engagement. So I work really closely with our branches, focused on the experience that our members receive in those branches. Also sit on the board of directors for our Pikes Peak chapter. And I am incredibly excited to share some budgeting and credit education for you all today. I've been in the financial industry for about 14 years now and have worked primarily in the branches. And I am incredibly passionate about ensuring that people have what they need to be successful financially. And so I hope that, from what you get today, you find little pieces of nuggets that you get to take back to your personal lives and really implement so that you can be financially successful. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Todd. Of course. So my name's Emma, if you didn't hear it the first couple times, but I work at Ent Credit Union. My role there is supervisor of financial coaching. So financial coaching is a way to meet one-on-one with somebody to discuss topics like we're doing today. So I started my career in credit unions about 6 years ago. I started working in our service centers, and there's where I fell in love with all things financial wellness. I absolutely adored helping our members. So from there, I joined Ent's community education team and helped get the financial coaching program up and running here. So very excited to be here for you with you all today. For our presentation, there is a way that you can actually join us. You can do it on your desktop. You can do it on a phone as well. We utilize a tool called Menti. So we'll have some different engagement slides, kind of helps us build our presentation, make sure we're focusing on things that you want to focus on. So a couple different ways you can join Menti. You can go to the website, www.menti.com, and it'll ask you for a code, and it's those numbers right up there. We'll make sure to get that in the chat. You can also scan a QR code if you have your mobile device. So if you scan that code, it should not ask you for any other entries. It should get you right to our presentation. So I will hang out here, make sure everyone is able to get in. Let me throw in the Menti code as well.
I just threw it in the chat.
Oh, you're amazing. Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome.
So another reason to join the Menti presentation, we actually have some trivia for you all. So we'll start off today talking a little bit about budgeting. We'll break it up with a little mini trivia game, and then we'll come back, talk about credit, and have another trivia after that. We do have two $25 Amazon gift cards up for grabs, though, with those. So when we get to the trivia piece, we'll make sure everyone's still able to get all signed into that. But I'll hang out here for just another minute so everyone can get signed in. And yes, it should just say budgeting and credit. You should just see kind of that intro slide right now. So you are all set. And if Menti acts weird for whatever reason, you can typically just refresh whatever browser you're joining from, should get you right back to our presentation. On any engagement slides, we will also have the Menti website as well as that code to rejoin. but I'll give it 30 more seconds and then we'll dive into our presentation for today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So for what we're talking about, like I already mentioned, we'll start off talking about some different budgeting methods as well as diving into some saving strategies. After we have our trivia for our budget session, we'll actually take a quick 5-minute break, so you can definitely plan on that. But of course, feel free to step away whenever you need to. We'll come back to talk about the importance of credit, what goes into our credit score, and how to use credit responsibly to help set ourselves up for success. So we actually have our first engagement slide. So whatever device you joined on, you should have the option to answer the question. But we are curious, when you hear the word budgeting, what are some of those first words that come to your head? How does budgeting make you feel? And I should have added all Menti responses are anonymous, but we will see them pop up on the screen as those responses come in. Anxious. Accomplished, I love that one. Hard to keep, goals, savings, confidence, frustrating, I get that. Some I saw frugal on there, constrained. Somebody threw in the chat, need to know how. Absolutely. Where do we start? Hesitant. Yeah, these are great. I'll leave this up there if there's any more thoughts that are coming in just for a minute, but we really like to start with this. So I hope that if you are feeling, again, a little bit anxious around budgeting, you know you're not alone. A lot of us have different feelings when it comes to budgeting. That's due to past experiences we've had. I do think that budgeting is almost kind of like a bad word. It has that connotation that it is, it is restrictive. It is time consuming, all of those things. What we're hoping that we can kind of shift your mindset on a little bit is, yes, it can be a little overwhelming. We'll talk about ways to break it down, but budgeting is really where we want you all to start. It is such a crucial part of your overall financial picture. So thank you again for sharing all those thoughts. So our budget, I like to think of it as just our roadmap. So we are currently somewhere, and I bet right now you can think of a couple different financial goals, things that you want to achieve that require finances. So we have, we're at point A and we all want to get to point B. Your budget is going to tell you exactly how to get there. So it is important for us to take a peek back at our past spending. So what are those expenses that we have? What are those spending habits maybe we have developed? So really important to gather, income, expenses. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but figure out where you are. One thing I want to add, it can be overwhelming going over, past expenses. We recommend pulling about 3 months of statements. There might be some things, some purchases that maybe you weren't too proud of. That's okay. We really like to take a solution-focused mindset when we are thinking about our finances. So what's done is done. There's nothing we can necessarily do about those past decisions. We need that information, though, to move forward. We are focusing on today, tomorrow, and every single day after that. What actions can I take to better my financial picture? And of course, it does take time. So a really big part, something that we'll talk about a lot, is how we want to spend our money. I think spending is a big thing. It's super easy to spend our money these days. So we'll also talk a little bit about identifying those different values. But I want you to, whatever that point B is for you, that goal that you want to achieve, make sure you keep that forefront in your mind, especially as we're talking through all these different things today. Our budget is just another way to plan. So really good for us as we are thinking about, today, tomorrow, every day after that. What events do we have coming up? Really good to get ahead of different things. Are there expenses later in this year that you'll have to do? Maybe it is time for you to finally get those new tires for the car. When we are talking about budgeting, balancing our goals, different events we might have coming up, prioritization might need to be something that happens. So what really matters to you? You might need to, put some goals, maybe contribute less into savings for those goals. Just due to a priority coming up. Maybe it's time-based. Maybe it's just something that matters more to you. So prioritization is definitely a thing there. Budgeting is all about balance. And research, that is a really good place to start. So again, thinking long-term, those things you have coming up. Try to do that research. What is the most affordable option? What option makes the most sense? What options can you actually accomplish in that given timeline? And then most of those financial goals that we have, it's probably saving up some money to achieve something, whether that's retirement, maybe it's purchasing a home, but savings is really crucial. We'll talk about the importance of savings, how, it should be something that's worked into our budget, but after we do that research and figure out, we get that number that we're trying to shoot for. So we're figuring out how to save. Again, you want to break it down monthly, depending on kind of that time frame there. But the last thing that's really important is know your resources. Life events can be exciting things. I also know that they can be not so great things. So really good for you to just understand different resources you have available, whether that's from an education standpoint or from, a financial assistance standpoint. So one resource I always like to share, you guys might have heard of it, but United Way's 211 program is phenomenal. If you are experiencing a hardship at any point in time, their 211 program is basically like a nonprofit matchmaker. So they'll go through your situation, see what kind of assistance you might be available for. So know your resources, never be afraid to ask those questions. Always check with your financial institution to see if they have people you can sit down with and talk about your goals and what's going on more in depth. So again, budgeting, it can be fun. It's a little bit time consuming, but it really is what we need to do first to set ourselves up for success, to be able to achieve all the amazing goals that we have. So I'm going to pass it over to Todd now, and he's going to start talking to us a little bit more about how to actually budget. What are some strategies that we can utilize?
Thank you, Emma. So we've got a few strategies here that we're going to talk to you about, and one in particular that we'll dive into. Some of you may be familiar with these methods and strategies, and some of you might not. We're not really telling you any one of these methods are the right way, but what really matters is what's right for you and what you feel is going to be the best method for you. And really to stick to your method. If you choose one of these options, stick with it for some time, see if it works. If it doesn't, then look up a different method to see if that method might work for you or that strategy. So the ones we have listed up here is the first one is envelope. The envelope method, some of you might be familiar with. It's a traditional way of budgeting. Basically, what you would do is you would have an envelope for each of the items that you've planned out for, and you fill that envelope with a certain amount of cash. And as you utilize that cash for that specific item, once it runs out, you have utilized all your funds for that specific envelope type. For example, if you had a envelope that was specified for food and you put $100 in that envelope, that was your $100 to spend for the month in that envelope. Once you've used your $100, you now have to use money elsewhere to pay for that. And the goal is that you're only using what's in that envelope for that specific item. We are in a world where cash is not used as much anymore, and so digital is another option for this, and financial institutions give you the ability to open up different savings or different checking accounts, different products to potentially utilize the same method of envelopes and having a different account for each one of those envelopes that you would have, putting the money in there and then using the money from that account until it's no longer there. And so envelope method is one of the traditional strategies that has been used. The second strategy is the zero-sum strategy. So with this strategy, every single penny that comes into the house is accounted for. So you've accounted for every single penny that comes in from your income. Rather than paying the bills and then having funds left over sitting in your checking account, every cent is allocated to where it needs to go. This can help prevent situations where your money is spent without knowing exactly how. That is the zero-sum method. There's the automatic method. So this automatic method is basically what it says. You set up everything to just automatically come out of your account. So if you get paid on Friday, you've got all your bills to come out on that Friday for whatever it is that you have for your bills and transactions that might come and take place. and trying to set up everything to be as automatic as possible. And it's more of like a hands-off type of thing. I don't want to work with it. I don't want to really go into each one of these different credit cards or different places to pay my bills. I want them to just automatically come out of my account. That is your automatic saving or your automatic budgeting strategy. The last strategy is a reverse strategy. This strategy places a heavy emphasis on savings. Once needs are paid for, putting money into savings is prioritized over satisfying the wants category. And so that is really about putting money into your savings account first and then paying out everything else. So now we're going to dig into a strategy that we really like to emphasize and talk about. And so this strategy is kind of breaking out your budget into different percentages. It's called a percentile method. And so what you'll do is all your spending is broken down into 3 different categories. 50% of your spending is based on what you actually need. 30% is based on what you would want, and 20% would be based on your savings. The percentages are not set in stone. They're just more guidelines for you to follow, something that you can kind of reference and you can adjust based on what might work best for you. Now, when you go in and you calculate this, it's important to remember that your income should be based on what you're actually going to receive, not what you make. There's the pre-tax and the post-tax. And so pre-tax, you get your income. That's not what you actually receive to your account. What you receive to your account is what you would want to calculate your percentages off of. For example, if you see here, if your income is $1,000 and that's what you actually receive into your account, you would then break it out into different items. You would break 50% of that, or $500, into your needs category. You would break 30% of that, or $300, into your wants category, and 20% of that out into your savings category, or $200 into your savings category. Now, looking at your wants and needs, that's something you kind of think a little bit about. That would be kind of what your version of your wants and needs are. And we can kind of dig into that here in a little bit. We're going to have an activity where you get to kind of share what wants and needs are. It's really important for you to pay yourself. And so 20% or $200 might feel pretty overwhelming at first, but as time progresses, it will build up. And if you break it out into your plan and your budget, it'll feel really comfortable for you the more that you start to work on that and build it into your budget. So now we're going to dig into a sample budget and kind of break it out for you.
So what we have here on the screen, just wanted a nice visual example. We'll talk about some different tools with budgeting as well later in our class, but World has many different, options as far as budgeting can go. Todd already mentioned kind of trying out different strategies for you. There is so many different budgeting sheets. Again, you can check with your financial institution. Pinterest is my absolute favorite place to find all things budgeting. There are lots of cool sheets for that. So sample budget, we just kind of wanted to show you what that might look like. So Todd already mentioned, we are starting with that after tax. We can only budget the money we have coming in. Make sure you're listing any additional income. If you have, any side hustles, things like that. What we have broken down here is kind of like that zero sum budget. So this one is really getting down to, the pennies. It's a very simplified example. But one thing I really want to highlight, and Todd pointed this out when he was talking about savings, but we have savings listed as a line item in our budget. One thing I really recommend is treat savings like an expense. Just pretend it's something that you have to pay. You're paying yourself, so it's the best type of payment you can make, but treat it just like any other bill. And again, you can start small. $5 here and there is better than no dollars. And I apologize, Todd, I think I kind of messed up the slide order a little bit. So here's that sample budget. Again, very simplified, but just do some research, see what makes sense for you. Step number 1 is really just making sure you're getting everything laid out. So I'll pass it back to Todd. Apologies.
That's okay. Thank you. So now we're going to have an activity that's going to be in the Mentee. If you go into your Mentee, it's asking a question for you to rate each one of these items based on what you feel, and this is different for everyone. It's really based on what you think is for you. So really go into it and rate each one of these items, whether you need that item or you want that item. And you can use the sliding scale. It'll allow you to kind of slide it based on the rating that you feel is best for you. Perfect. So we can see housing is definitely a priority, something we all need. And so that's pretty common there. Transportation, we need vehicles or whatever we utilize for transportation. So we need that. Food can be a necessity. There might be some gray area there, depending on what kind of food you might want, right? If we think, we need food, but we might want to eat out more frequently than maybe going to go get groceries and eating at home more often, which might kind of factor into how we expense for our food. Cell phone and internet, it's more of a need because of the world we live in today. Mostly everything is based off of our phones or computers and remote, but sometimes, depending on how we utilize that, there's other ways that we can get that. So there's a little bit of gray area there. Subscription services, definitely a want. Entertainment can be a want. Could be some gray area depending on if that's a way that we feel we might need entertainment to relieve some stress or different things like that. So really kind of figuring out how that works for you. Thank you.
Oh,
I'll
thanks for
transition
sharing.
back over to Emma.
Awesome. So thanks everyone for sharing again. Some of us might thought some of those categories were needs and some of us might thought those were wants. Like Todd said, no one's wrong. It's all going to really depend on you, your personal situation. So kind of hinted at this, but your money and your values, we want to make sure that those are aligned. Whether you realize it or not, the second you purchase something, you're spending money on it, you are saying, this matters to me. This is important enough for me to spend my money on. So we've already talked about goals. When we are even thinking about spending those little purchases here and there, think about those goals. Will this purchase, the spending habit, will it help me achieve my goals or will it get in the way? Is this thing even important to us is another thing. I catch myself doing this all the time. I like it. I love Amazon. I'll admit that. And there's definitely times where I'll get on the app. I just want to spend some money. But being able to take that step back, take that time away. I give myself 24 hours if I find something I like to think about it. That helps me realize, is this important? Does this matter again? What's more important, those goals or, this little satisfaction I might be getting with the spending? And I do want to point out that you'll never hear it from any of us kind of, the typical restrictive budgeting advice. The whole, if you stop going to Starbucks, you're going to be able to purchase a home and be a millionaire in 2 years, right? That's not something that I want you guys to take away from this. Budgeting does require a little bit of discipline, right? We want to help restrict ourselves to, again, achieve that goals for that long term. But if you like something, just budget for it. Make sure it is, aligning with those values. Like, for example, I do have an Amazon budget. I mentioned that. It makes me happy. It's something I want to spend those wants on. I'm just mindful of the amounts and, the allowance I kind of give myself for that spending category. This sometimes requires a little bit of a shift in a mindset. So one of our coworkers, she does this a lot. I think I've heard it from a couple other people, but what she does when she is thinking about making a purchase is she converts whatever the price is to how many hours she would have had to work to purchase that. So again, the $10 purchase here and there might not seem like a lot, but if you put it into perspective, break it down in the kind of that hourly range that you're getting, might view that item a little bit different. Most people, I think we all value our time. So find those things again that you value, that matter. Try to change that mindset a little bit. One thing I will say with spending, again, we got to look at those past habits. One of my favorite things I tell almost everyone to get it started is a money journal. So jot about your goals, jot about those feelings you were having when you were making those decisions around spending. So anytime I make an impulse purchase kind of, out of my budget, I write it down. Some of you might spend money when you're having a bad day to try to make it better. Some of you might actually spend money, be more inclined to do that impulse purchasing when you're having a good day, actually. Just, it all depends. So take the time to do that reflection. Think about your goals, the values that you have, the spending habits, and try to switch the mindset around that a little bit. A great way we can also shift our mindset around our finances is actually creating a little emotional connection to it. So Todd shared the great tip that you can have multiple savings accounts, different checking accounts for all the different things that you're trying to achieve. But when you sign into online banking, seeing, your primary savings might not mean too much. But if you attach a name onto that, what are you saving for? It's a way to trick our brains to kind of second guess if we are thinking about, spending outside of that category or pulling from a savings. So name it your goal. You can get funny with it, whatever you want to do, give that nickname. And something that I've always found super interesting is adding a date onto that goal. So we see car down payment 2025. You're actually 40% more likely to keep the money in there. You're kind of holding yourself accountable, right? I said I wanted to go to Tahiti in 2027, is making this transfer so I can, go on that shopping spree that I really feel like I want to do, going to be worth it. So create that connection to your money. It also just helps you stay organized as well, getting those different nicknames in that account. So really recommend that. So again, we talked about the emotional connection, opening up those different shares. We're going to transition, let's try that word again, into talking a little bit more about savings. So savings is a very broad term, right? We know we should save, but what are those things that we're saving for? We're going to go over 3 main types of savings that we do believe everyone should have worked into their budget. The first one is what is known as periodic savings. This is the same idea if you've ever heard the term sinking funds. So this is putting money away for those once in a blue moon expenses. We live in the great state of Colorado, which means things like car registration are a little bit higher than other states, right? That's an expense that most of us probably have coming up. I don't know about you. No, I'm not the only one. Sometimes, even though I know the date, that sneaks up on me a little bit. One of those things was those expenses come up. It can take away, the cash to cover your other expenses. Maybe it takes away money for your needs or restricts how much you can spend on your wants. So really good to get into the habit of putting a little bit of money away throughout the year to build up that savings. So when those expenses come up, it's not a huge hindrance to our budget. So easiest way, figure out the frequency. Is it every year, twice a year, every quarter? And then you can kind of divide that up, dependent on the month. So car registration, divide that by 12. That's what you want to try to put away each month to be able to afford that. So with the periodic savings, definitely another kind of great place just for things that we just might forget about. So even if maybe you don't have a lot of expenses coming up that happen occasionally, try to get some money set aside, again, just similar to kind of the idea of a rainy day fund, but just for those different expenses that might kind of sneak up on us. So periodic savings is a great one to start to get established. Now, I mentioned a little bit of a rainy day fund. Don't want to get this confused with our emergency or safety net savings. So we all know the importance of it. Experts recommend anywhere from 3 to 6 months, typically, saving that amount of expenses in case of a loss of income. I will let you know that a lot more experts are leaning towards 6 to even up to 12 months of expenses, just given the job market and just, the uncertainty of the world. So that is a huge goal, especially if you haven't started to save that up. But we'll talk about some ways to break it down and definitely make it a little bit more obtainable. So first step is just get started. Again, $5 here and there is better than no dollars at all. So just get started. Try to see where you can work in your budget, what amount you can put towards your emergency fund. It's really important for our safety net savings to have it easy access. And all we mean by that is the funds are liquid. So you don't want to have it tied up in any sorts of investments or in a product like a certificate of deposit where you might have penalties if you need to withdraw from it before a set time. So make sure it's a nice account that typical savings that you can pull from. One thing that is kind of helpful for some people, even check out opening up an entirely new account for your emergency savings, especially as we start seeing that balance grow. It might be a little tempting to dip into it. Out of sight, out of mind is fantastic. Todd told us too about the automation with our budget. Set up an automatic transfer for those different savings. So we want to make sure that we can get the money when we need it. And then again, calculate the goals. So I mentioned, kind of anywhere from 3 to 12 months is what experts are recommending. And that's a lot. What we recommend is micro goals. Break it down a little bit more. You can try to save a goal, maybe it's just $1,000. That's your first goal that you want to save and get to. You can even do it by different expense. So maybe you want to save up 3 months of your grocery expenses, and that's your first goal that you achieve. So set those mini goals, celebrate those wins. It, of course, takes time. Give yourself that grace. What gets a little tricky with the emergency savings is being a little honest with ourselves and truly defining what an emergency is. So car registration, you heard me talk about that a whole bunch in the last one. That's not necessarily an emergency, right? The car tires, things like that. We know they're coming. That's what our periodic savings is for. For your overall financial wellness, again, we want to keep this money there in case we have a loss of income. So set those boundaries on what exactly an emergency is and what you need to pull from. Always too want to highlight that your safety, make sure you have food, a safe place to stay, water to drink, all of that. That always takes priority first over any of that. So want to give that disclosure. And then again, we're trying to save those expenses, but emergencies can also be things like maybe medical, something comes up and we have some medical bills. So just be aware that, there are some of those unknowns out there. Again, try to think a little bit about what's coming up for you. Think about your personal situation, maybe some things you're experiencing now that might, have some different expenses later in the future. So that's our emergency savings. And last, I think probably the most fun of it all is more for that long-term savings. So that is things like, down payments, anything that you want to achieve, looking very long-term into retirement. It's good for us to put that money away. I'm sure most of you have heard the idea of compound interest, but that's the idea that your money is going to be growing with those interest as interest is getting added into those savings accounts, that balance is growing, then you get interest on that interest and the money you already had in there. So it is never too late. It is never too early to start savings. The best time to do that is today. So again, work on getting something established. If you don't have all these different savings types right now, that is perfectly fine. We will get you there, but work on some ways to get organized and kind of figure out those different goals that we might have. All right, I'm going to forgive me. I'm going to pass it back to Todd and he's going to wrap up our budgeting section of today's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. So kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about some budget busters. As we know, savings can be hard, and if you don't plan accordingly and you don't pay attention to what's happening, savings generally is one of those first things to go because you don't have to have it or you might not focus on it. As you heard Emma talk a little bit at the beginning, she said, go back through your last 3 months of statements and look into some of those things that might be impacting your ability to save. One of those things is digging into your spending habits. Understanding where your money is going is incredibly important, and it adds up really quick. Even those small little things that you might not think about, when you do it often, it will add up fast. An example of that is, much to Emma's point, the coffee situation. If I buy a $5 coffee every morning on my way to work, that ends up being $25 a week. If there's 4 weeks in a month, that is $100 a month that I'm spending just ordering coffee every single morning. Now, it's not to say that you can't order coffee, but maybe there's another way that you can go about spending money to coffee, right? A Keurig coffee pod costs $1.10 per coffee pod. And you might be able to save yourself some money if you really dig into some of those spending habits. We know lunch is expensive, food is expensive. Another example is spending money every day at lunch. Average is about $15 a lunch, a meal if you spend money at lunch. And if you add that up over the week and then over the month, it adds up really quick. And if you're not paying attention to it, you might not realize you're spending as much as you actually are spending. And so digging into that is really important. And going back through those last 3 months of statements can help you realize, are there other places that I might be able to make some adjustments? Another thing would be impulse buying, going out and just kind of buying things without really thinking through. Emma shared a great example earlier about thinking, how much do I have to work in order to pay for this item? And that pause there really gives you the ability to just think about, is it something you want? Is it something you need? Does it factor in rather than just buying it? Stores, when you walk into those stores, they are meant and are built to offer you everything that you're not in there to buy. And so being incredibly intentional as you're going into different stores. If you're going into a grocery store, I am maybe guilty of this sometimes. Costco gets me every single time. But if I don't walk in with a list, I walk in with twice the list that I intended to go in there with and go in there for. And that's the goal. They put everything out in front of you and you touch it, you want to buy it, it ends up in the cart and you walk out with it. And you don't realize it until you get home and you bought everything that you didn't need. And so being intentional, if you're going to go to the grocery store, you're going to go out and purchase something, have a list and stick to your list so that you can then stick to your plan and your budget. Additionally, retail therapy is very similar. You might have you might feel good about going out and spending time shopping and buying things. And when you get home, you really think back and you look at the receipt and realize you spent way more than you intended to, just because you wanted to go out and that was your form of, kind of working through whatever it is that you might have. So trying to avoid spending more than what you've budgeted. And those budgeting plans really help you stick to what it is. If you're going to go into a store, set a goal. I'm going to spend $50 and that's all I'm going to spend. And if you need something more than that, maybe develop a plan or a savings account that can help you get to what it is that you need. Another thing that really, skipped it. All right. Another thing is subscriptions. We talked a little bit about that. It had its own line item in our budget that we built out. Everything has a subscription nowadays. The average subscriptions, the average amount that people are paying for subscriptions is $219 total. Those are different things. If you think about all the subscriptions that are out there, you have your streaming services. Clothes has subscriptions. They send you a monthly box of clothes on a monthly basis. You can have a Chewy box for your dogs, food prepping, car washes. You can spend $25 a month and you get unlimited car washes. While all of these things sound so great when you sign up for them, you don't realize how many subscription services you end up signing up for, and those hit on a monthly basis. And if you're not paying attention to that, they can add up rather quick. In fact, 74% say it's easy to forget reoccurring monthly subscription charges. 56% do not share streaming services with someone else. And 42% continue to pay for reoccurring monthly subscriptions after they are no longer using it. And so subscriptions are meant to do that. They honestly are put out there so that the hopes is that you sign up for the subscription and you continue utilizing the service. And if you don't, it is much harder for you to go in and cancel that service, or you may forget to go in and cancel that service. And so paying attention to your subscriptions and really utilizing different resources. I personally have T-Mobile, and T-Mobile offers the ability to pay for Netflix and Hulu. And so it's not a subscription service that I personally have to pay for. It's already looped into my telephone bill that I pay. And so looking into different ways that you might still get those same subscriptions or find other ways to pay for them while you're budgeting. Something that is really important to think about is the lifestyle inflation. When you think about this lifestyle inflation, as our income increases, so does our spending. And so this is a little hamster on a wheel. And typically what happens is we work, and our hopes is that we get a paycheck, we get our paycheck and we continue to work. And generally on an annual basis or wherever you might work, you might look for more opportunities to earn more income. Some companies will give you an increase, they'll give you a pay raise, and you get that pay raise, you have additional money, you spend that new money, you start creating your budget around what your new pay is, and that cycle begins to just rotate and flow. One of the things that you really want to pay attention to and think about is stick to your values. Don't worry or think about what it is that you're going to get paid. Spend what you have. It's so important to stick with that. If you do get a raise, figure out, is that a raise that I absolutely have to implement into my budget? Or could I potentially take that raise and increase the amount of savings that I have on a monthly basis and put it towards my savings instead and continue to live the way that I was living? And that will help you ramp up your savings and maybe put some money into some of those different buckets that you have that would help you get that purchase that you've been wanting to, or save for that emergency savings. Another thing to think about is when you are getting money or you're expecting money, don't spend it until you have it. If you do that and you're expecting that raise, it can really start to mess up this lifestyle that you have. And so one of those things I'm thinking about right now is taxes are coming and everyone expects taxes, right? But if we spend that money before the taxes come and then we go file our taxes, we might not get the same amount that we were anticipating. And that might impact some of your buckets that you have. And so that lifestyle inflation is really important to kind of think about how you're budgeting and when you might have money coming to you, what you're doing to adjust your lifestyle. And is it necessary, or do you want to keep having it the same way that you have been? Were we gonna
Did I
save this
miss?
for the last? I think we're
Oh,
good.
sorry. That was the credit monitoring tool. We have that at the end.
Okay, cool. So, and lastly, for the budgeting piece, before we open it up to you guys to answer some questions, there's so many financial management tools out there, and we encourage you to lean into some of those tools. Those tools give you a easy way to pull all your accounts together and look at them in one place. Each one of the financial institutions out there generally has a financial management tool that you can lean into. You might use it already, and if you don't, reach out to your financial institution and see what it is that they have to offer. And it's a really easy way to kind of pull everything into one place. You can categorize your spending. You can create budgets within those tools. You can have goals set up so that you can see how you're tracking to those goals on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. You can set up those automatic transfers, those automatic payments, however you want to create your budget. Those financial management tools give you the flexibility and the ability to do that. And it's a great tool for you all to lean into. But we definitely encourage you to find a tool that works best for you all. And that's it.
So
now go ahead.
yeah, sorry, Todd. Sorry for messing up our slides so much. Don't know what happened to the order, some of those, but we're going to dive into trivia here, but wanted to see, I don't think I saw any questions in the chat, but any questions about anything we talked about? And feel free to come off mute too as well. Awesome. Just want to double check on that. So I already see some people coming into this. So here is our mentee trivia. So it will give you a name, and we can definitely, if you want to keep it, whatever the nickname they give you, that's perfectly fine. We'll just need you to let us know in the chat who that is. So I'll let everyone get signed into that. And I did see a question come in. Is there a way to automatically transfer money from a paycheck to a savings account? Yes, absolutely. Couple different ways you can set that up. Your employer might have the option to break up that direct deposit when you are getting it set up. So I know, like, for my employer's end, I do have the ability to add a different kind of routing number and account number for a portion of my paycheck. If you don't have that option, that's where you'd want to go into your online banking with your institution, and you can set up that transfer. So maybe it comes into your checking, have a transfer set up that same day into savings.
Great question. And that brings me that something came up when I thought about that question. Some people like to have their savings account at the same financial institution that they have their checking account. And some people like to have that stuff split up in two different places. And much to your question, have money deposited in an entirely different place so that it's out of sight, out of mind. And that really helps with some of that discipline, being able to not easily transfer that money over to the checking account so that it's immediately available to you. So something to think about. Also, some financial institutions give you the ability to hide an account in your online banking, which is awesome. So you can go to your online banking and you can see some of your accounts, but maybe you might not see that account and you can hide it from your view. So you're less likely to go in there and transfer it when you need it. Saw another question pop up in the chat. I did not understand when mentioned automatic transfer.
So automatic transfer, that means the computer is, putting the money into a different account for you. I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Can you do automatic transfer before your bill is due? Most likely, I would say, again, it depends. We can always, again, kind of sit down to look at some individual stuff. And we'll talk about credit as well too later in our session. But for those automatic transfers, you can typically set them up for the due date of your bill. So if you're thinking like your credit card, utility payments, you can typically set it up and they'll automatically pull that out. So that's another great way to use that automation. Todd, anything to add for that one?
No, I think you said it well. I think for most bills, you can pay before they're due. But when it's an automatic pull from your account, generally you have to set up the date and you'll need to know what your bill amount is that you have to pay before it's automatically pulled out of your account. But in most cases, you can potentially pay a bill before it's due. Absolutely. Another question here. Do you recommend, Aisha, we are going to talk about credit for the second half of this, so we can dig into that a little bit. And then do you recommend opening with the banking account set up with incentives like get 350 open an account? Is that wise to do? I think that's just up to you. If you would like to move your account from one place to another, incentives are always great. I would just, always advise to read the fine print. That's a general thing to pay attention to. Some of those incentives require you to have a direct deposit set up or different things set up with those financial institutions. But really, it's up to you if you feel that's a financial institution that you would like to move your banking over to, and just pay attention to what might come along with that offer. And all of this stuff is really good, not only for yourselves, but your families. So much to your question, Aisha, not just on the credit piece, but for your children. It is so good for you to teach your children how to budget sooner rather than later. So all these things are really cool ideas and great ideas for you to bring to your kiddos. If they do things like they might have a lawn mowing business or different things like that, that they can start to learn how to budget. If they do ask for something at the store, really talking through, is that something you want? Is that something you need? And how can you save up some money to potentially get that item? What about building credit so they have a positive credit history at 18? we can kind of touch on this a little bit in the second half too, during our
Yeah.
credit portion.
Hang tight. Sorry, we hate doing that, but. All right. Any other questions around budgeting before we dive into the trivia? All right. So with Menti, all the questions will pop up on the device that you joined from. So make sure you're reading the questions all the way through. The faster you answer, the more points you will get with that. But of course, it doesn't matter if we're not getting those questions right. Oh, yeah.
I have a quick question, Emma. There is somebody who said that they are not able to get in. Do you have a way to communicate with them on the Q&A?
Maybe in Menti, it sometimes gives that option. Is that what it was through? I apologize if I missed something.
So yeah, I opened the Q&A and there was someone who said that they had gotten kicked off, and Melissa gave me a new code for them. So I thought, well, I can put that on the chat for you. And if you can communicate that to them, that'd be great while we do the quiz or whatever.
Yeah, and it looks like they got kicked out of the Zoom. I'm seeing the Q&A now. So they were in the waiting room.
I'm going to send you the code if you can share it with them, or if you can communicate with them via your side, because I'm not able to.
I know I'm not able to. It's anonymous
Okay.
question, so I so apologize.
No worries. Thank you.
Oh, if it was the Menti code, then yes, absolutely. Is that what they're having a hard time getting to, or were we talking about the Zoom?
Nope.
They got kicked out of Zoom.
Okay, just want to make sure. Apologies.
No worries. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. All right. Oh, I think I saw another question. Todd, do you want to talk about that one real quick before we dive into trivia, or do you want to save it and get started?
Let me scroll down real quick. How do you decide how much to put in savings on a fixed budget? That is a great question, Candace. It looks like it's from Candace. Really, it's going to be what's best for you. I know we talked about percentages and we say generally 20% is a good way, but it's really what's going to work best for your budget. If even savings $10 a paycheck is what you can do, put $10 in your savings account and it will build over time. Utilizing that budget is really important to break each item out. It might be that because you're on a fixed budget, you have to go through and get all your bills paid for before you can allocate some of that savings, and whatever is left over, then you can put into savings. If you want to build the other way around, you could start with savings and say, I would love to save $150 a paycheck. And then you go from there. And if you're negative, you might look at your budget and say, well, maybe there's a couple things here that I might be able to reduce the amount I pay for, or maybe I don't need this so that I can put money into savings. But it's really going to be based on what works best for you and how you can decide. Like, you're going to have to really build it out and decide what's going to work best for you. Candace, that's a good question. All right, last one, so we can have some time to get into this, into our trivia. What do you recommend when you are self-employed? I know that you should use a yearly average and divide by 12, but what if yearly amount then is lower, as can happen in this economy? That is a really good question, Lori. And again, each person's budget is tailored to what is gonna work best for them and what their financial situation is. This is more just starting with that income piece, being self-employed. There's other things that come into play with that. You might have to save money for paying taxes at the end of the year, and saving money. And so you might have a different method where you've got to put a certain amount of money away on a monthly basis just based on how much you actually brought in. It might be different. You might not have a pre-tax, post-tax. You have to factor it in a little bit different. And so I think the best method would be to figure out what your monthly income is and maybe just work off a percentage. If you want to save 10% of whatever it is that you bring in that month, then that's the number you stick with. So I think it really is going to be what works best for you based on how much you're bringing in.
Just an emphasis too with any variable income, just be able to identify those times where income's higher. That's where things like the periodic savings, can really be good. So, make sure you're figuring that out. I have helped some people that are self-employed with that variable income. We kind of do it two different ways. So we have a budget for if it's a really good month, and then a budget for if it's a not so great month. So that one's definitely more bare bones, right? So more focusing on those needs. Maybe we can't put money away, but you can kind of create different hypothetical budgets for different situations if that's helpful at all. So.
I think that's a great way of putting it. Take your lowest month maybe that you had and build your budget off of your lowest month so that when you do have those higher months, you have money available to allocate into other places, or a higher way, more money to put into savings to save for those months that are going to be lower. I like that.
All right.
My savings as a life bill, so I disassociate it as money to spend, but instead put money away towards a bill. That's great. That name really gives that shift of mindset for you. It kind of changes the way you look at that account. It's good. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to jump into the trivia so we can get a quick little break in before we move into credit. Oh, do you want me?
Oh, sorry, Todd.
Oh, you're good.
Which budgeting method prioritizes savings or debt repayment? Talked about a couple different options. Todd walked us through some. Was that reverse? All right, we got our question 2.
All right,
What type?
question 2, what type of savings is geared towards paying for occasional expenses? Great job. Periodic savings.
Midway point leaderboard, see where we're at. All right.
Which of the following is not one of the 5 parts to creating an emergency fund? That's right, depend on a credit card. What do you want to consider when creating a budget? Choose the best answer. That's right, all of them.
All right, so that was our first little mini trivia there for our budgeting section. So looks like the vote goat was the winner, whoever that is. We actually have Zach here on the call today. So if you want to direct message him on Zoom, your email address, absolutely do that. Or you can, talk to any of the people over at Parents Challenge too, and we can communicate, make sure you get that. But congratulations.
Congrats.
All right, friends, so we are going to take a super quick little 5-minute break. So we'll come back here just at 7:05. So give you some time to stretch your legs, any of that good stuff. Please feel free, if you're thinking of anything, throw those into the chat. As always, any other questions that we had over our break as far as budgeting goes before we dive into our credit section? Apologies. All right. So we are going to go back to Menti actually. So it should have updated for you, but similar to kind of how do we feel about budgeting, wanted to start off. What are some things that you guys already know about credit? You can, even if you have any questions, you can definitely like throw that into this as well. So let us know what you already know. Someone threw in the chat different types of credit can help with your score. I love that. Opening a credit card, keeping it current. I like it. Usage of credit cards. Yep. I like that. Every time I think I know. Credit is crazy complex. I think all of us here too, we learn something new about credit almost every day. Good credit, bad credit. Balances on credit cards we'll talk about in the chat. Borrowing money you don't have. Yep. You do need credit to qualify for different things. Someone threw in the chat, it affects insurance rates. We'll talk about that. That is absolutely true. You can gain rewards. We'll talk a little bit too about authorized users and building credit. Credit Karma is a fantastic tool as well. These are great. You need it to rent an apartment? Yes, you do. Making payments on time. These are fabulous. So again, kind of hinted at it. Credit is a very complex system. Lots of kind of gray areas that go on into that. But what we want to talk to you all about today is just understanding the system and how we can use it to our advantage. For what a credit score is, here's a nice little definition. It's simply just a number that's used by financial institutions as well as other service providers, and it determines your risk level. So it takes into account how you've been managing different credit accounts. Even non-credit accounts can affect your credit score as well. We'll talk about that. But it's 3 little numbers that just basically show your history and how you've interacted with different products before. Again, mentioned it, credit is complex. I personally do not think it's the most fair system in the world. Lots of kind of nuances that go into that. I always like to give the disclosure. We're not here to justify the credit system that we have. We just want you to have a good understanding of how it can work, how a good credit score can impact your finances moving forward. I always like to give the disclosure that your credit score is not a direct translation to who you are as a person. There is phenomenal people that have poor credit scores. Life happens. We completely understand. What's great about credit though is it is rolling. So again, similar to budgeting, we have those past behaviors. We have those things in the past. We can focus on today, moving forward, what we can do to improve that situation. So some people already mentioned this too. You guys knew some of it, but credit is not just for getting loans. That's something that I think a lot of people, a kind of misconception they have around it. So lenders, of course, financial institutions will pull your credit to determine that risk level. Utility companies actually do a little soft pull on your credit as well. That was a surprise for me when I moved into, my first home out of college when I was getting set up for utilities. It will affect your rate. You can pay a little bit higher for things like utilities, insurance, internet providers. You might have to pay a premium if you don't have that credit score that they have, whatever their minimum is. So really good to be mindful of that. Talked about landlords. Some employers, of course, will actually pull your credit as well. We talked about internet providers, insurance companies, cell phones, again, things that'll look at your credit. Something that was very interesting to me, I do not come from a military background, but even for military security clearances, credit is a part of that, what they determine if you can get that clearance. ENT does work very closely with the different Air Force bases here. It's kind of our roots as far as it goes in Colorado Springs, but our military liaison was actually sharing with me, forgive me, I don't know rankings, but he was pretty high up in the Air Force. There were times where he wasn't able to promote an individual because of their credit score. And that is so sad to think about. But again, unfortunately, it is a factor that a lot of people are looking at. The reason credit is there is, again, it's to determine that risk level. If I walked up to any one of you and said, hey, do you mind giving me $250,000 so I can buy a house? I hope you would say no because you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. So right now, credit is kind of the best way for those institutions to determine what makes sense for you. I also like to think of credit as a protectant. So if you do have a poor credit score, I can understand how frustrating that is, but being approved for more debt isn't necessarily going to help that situation. So very complex system. Again, we are not here to justify it. We just want you to have a good understanding. So that's kind of overall what a credit score is. I'm going to pass it over to Todd to give us a little bit more information on how those three numbers are calculated.
Thank you. So there are three different credit bureaus out there. The three main large credit bureaus are TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Each of those credit bureaus collect different credit information. They collect information that might be related to different credit products that you have out there. They collect information like loan status, how has your payments been on your loans? They collect information about how many payments you've had on your loans. They collect information such as where have you lived and where have you applied for different loan accounts, or maybe even accounts that are just like a checking or a savings account. It provides that information, your history and addresses, and all of that information is then gathered into these credit reports and provided to anyone who might be pulling a credit report for you or yourself to help determine that risk associated with your credit report. All of that information is then calculated and put into different models. There's several different models out there on how it's all calculated. The most common one is it spits out a then FICO score or a credit score. Those are the numbers that you always see when someone asks or tells you your credit score. Generally, it'll be a FICO score. And I will tell you, it's never going to be the same number. No matter how many times you pull it, it will always be different. And the reason for that is because different financial institutions, different areas of the financial institution use different models of pulling that number. And what is built into that is a crazy mathematical equation of how it takes different risk from each one of those different credit products and things to then associate towards that credit score. There's also a Vantage score, which is pretty similar to FICO, just another model of pulling your actual score and the number associated with your credit report.
I will say, just because we talked about Credit Karma, I like to just mention that Credit Karma and a lot of those different credit monitoring tools, they will use that Vantage score. So that is typically kind of the difference you see. I checked Credit Karma. Why are you telling me it's a different number? So I always like to give that disclosure too. You can see at those credit monitoring tools what it's showing you. Please do not stress out though, thinking, oh my gosh, I need to check all my different credit scores. The tips that we talk about today are going to help improve all different credit scores that we have. So just some good to know information. And I did see someone threw in the chat about how often should we check it. We'll talk about checking our credit reports too. Really good to do that as frequently as possible. As far as checking your actual score itself, dealer's choice, I would say. I don't want you to get too stressed out, checking it every single day, just like a financial advisor would tell you not to check your investments every single day. But it is really good to be monitoring for that fraud. So checking the reports frequently. I take a peek into my credit monitoring tools about once a month personally.
Cool. Well, this is the standard FICO scoring range. Again, don't get hung up on the score. Really, we're going to talk through the scores, what they might mean, and how they determine the risk. But really, what is built into the score are the meat of your actual credit report. So it really takes into consideration all the things that were built into those credit reports, and then how it might come into this credit score. Something just to think about is not all credit scores are the same. And I forgot to mention this on the last one, because sometimes financial institutions choose which credit bureaus they report to. And so you might see something on one credit bureau and get a score, then the other credit bureau, you might see a different score because it's a difference of what's being reported to that. Why? Again, we don't understand it. It's based on choice of the financial institutions and how they report. So your standard FICO scoring range goes anywhere from 300 up to 850. Some scoring models out there, there's an auto FICO score that can go up to a score of 900. And so if you see a score up that high, that's why that happens. For the first range, 300 to 580, that would be considered a poor credit score. Now, again, that doesn't define who you are, and one mistake doesn't put you here. It's not one thing, it might be a multitude of things that got you there. And so really, there is hope for anybody, depending on where you're at in this model, to get to potentially a good, a very good, or exceptional. So if you're in that poor range, really analyzing and working with someone to help understand your credit report and figure out a plan to increase your credit score and help you climb out of that range. You might have a little bit of a harder time getting approved for things, such as loans or different services, if your credit score is in that range. Emma had shared that your credit score might be a factor in some of those things that were listed previously, and it might cause an increase in some of those services if your score might be in that poor range. Again, if you are in that range, really focusing on what's in that credit report, and working with someone to help you increase your score. 580 to 670 would be considered fair. 670 and 740 would be considered good. 740 to 800 would be considered very good. And honestly, I know we have the 800 to 850 where it says exceptional, but if you're in that 740 to 800, that's really the sweet spot. Anything above that 720 to 800 is really the sweet spot of where your credit would help you get the most benefit whenever you're looking for different loans and services. Offer the better rates within that very good portion there. You'll have little trouble getting approved for different services. Generally, it just shows a really good credit background, and less risky in that credit score. We consider that like the A+ credit is anything above that mark there. Would you add anything to that, Emma?
No, I think that was perfect. I just lost my mouse. Let me get back. There we go.
Perfect. So we'll ask you all a question. So if you want to jump into your Menti, what do you think has the largest impact on your credit score? So we've got length of credit, payment history seems to be one of the bigger ones, mix of credit. So having multiple different types of credit products is the mix of credit, length of credit, how long have you had your credit products for, payment history, how are you doing with your payments that you have on your credit report, capacity and utilization, how are you utilizing, how much of your credit cards are you using, do you have low balances, no balances, are they completely maxed out? So we've got a larger portion of us saying payment history, which is correct. Payment history has one of the largest impacts on your credit report. When you're making on time, so here is the credit score breakdown, and it shows that 35% of your credit score, your credit history, is based on payment history. And really what that is how are you doing with your payments? Are you making payments on time? Might be jumping ahead of myself. So this is the credit score breakdown. So 35% of your credit is broken down into payment history. 30% is based on the utilization of your credit cards or how much you're using on your credit report. 15% is based on length of credit, 10% is based on mix of credit, and then 10% is also based on new credit that you're adding to your credit report.
I really like this visual, our little credit pie. One thing I really want to highlight when we are talking about building or rebuilding our credit, 65% of our score is taken up in two categories. So our payment history and our utilization. We'll walk through a breakdown of all of these categories, what exactly that means, the kind of steps to take to make sure you're scoring good in them. But this is where I want you to focus on that payment history and that utilization piece. So let's dive into each of those sections. So coming in first place is our payment history again. So 35% of our credit score. Creditors like two things when it comes to payments. Number one, that you're making those payments on time or early. And number two, that you're making them in full. So one missed payment can drop your score up to 100 points. So that is something to keep in mind. It also depends to the severity of the type of payment that's missed. So missing a mortgage payment is going to have a different effect than missing a credit card payment. The frequency, so how often you're missing those payments. If you're frequently missing payments, they might start to have larger impacts on your score as you continue that. So really good to keep in mind. So this is, or again, if you're looking at building or rebuilding credit, make sure that you're getting that plan in place to make those payments on time or early and in full. Life happens. We completely understand. Something to keep in mind with this category. The second that you realize you might be missing a loan payment, please just pick up the phone and call that creditor, whoever it is. Let them know the situation that's going on. There is typically a grace period before they report a missed payments to those reporting agencies, but by being proactive, calling them on the phone, you could help avoid any fees that are associated with it. They can also help you get a plan in place. Most creditors will actually offer, a one-time, a couple-time payment due date change. So if it's just some cash flow, something's going on this month specific, you might have that ability. So communication is key for that payment history. Again, it is the largest part of our credit score. A missed payment can really impact it. So get that plan in place. Make sure you can make those payments on time and in full. Moving on to that capacity, utilization, credit usage, lots of different words that you might have heard as far as this goes. This is 30% of our overall credit score. So this is looking solely at revolving lines of credit. So think, well, a line of credit, it could not have a piece of plastic attached to it, but primarily those credit cards. So those are accounts, where the balance, what you have due can change from month to month. So this section of our credit score is looking at what is actually getting carried over. So the name of the game for this is we want to keep the balance we have carrying over month to month at 30% or less of our total available credit. And of course, the less, the better. So just for a super simple example here, let's say I have a credit card and my limit is $100. To stay under this 30%, I'd only want $30 that I wouldn't be able to pay off carrying over month to month. Staying in that 30 or below range, that is actually going to help build your credit. And again, the lower, the better. So we'll talk more about credit cards. Really want you to make sure you're using it as a tool that you can pay off in full, not leveraging it to, change your lifestyle by any means. But 30% again, once you get into that, especially if you have higher utilization, you'll start to see your credit score increase fairly quickly. Looking back at my $100 limit, again, life happens. If I do have to have over 30%, so $30 on my $100 credit card, anywhere up to 50%, so $50, this is a neutral zone. You won't necessarily see your credit score drop drastically from having balances in that range, but you won't necessarily see it improve. Anything above that 50% of balance due compared to available credit, that's where we can start to see this section actually negatively impacting our credit score. So again, name of the game, one thing to remember for this section is you want to keep it 30% of the available credit. And if you're not able to do that, again, just work towards paying down those balances, get that plan in place. One thing I also like to highlight when we are thinking about our credit cards, again, we'll talk about it being mindful of our limits and all of that, but maxing out a line of credit. So bringing it, my $100, I'm putting $100 on it. It is not going to wait for a statement date to end to report that. That is actually considered a reportable event. So the second I hit that maxed out line, the credit company can report that it's maxed out. And that is not something that you want to see on your credit report, especially if you can't avoid it. So again, we talked about the importance of savings, knowing your different resources as those things come up. So be mindful of those balances on our credit cards. Length of credit is coming in next at 15%. So, I mean, it makes sense. Having a long credit history of good habits is going to help increase your score. This is one of those categories where you might have some disadvantages if maybe you're starting off credit, recently, maybe you're younger. That could be some things. It's just kind of a waiting game for it. But really important to keep in mind that it looks at the average age of, the individual account. So it takes that into consideration. I've had this credit card for 6 months. It also kind of figures out the average age of all of my credit accounts. So it can be good to keep those long standing. I think somebody threw that in as kind of a tip that they knew about credit. Keeping those long lasting accounts will help improve your credit score. So just be mindful as you're applying for new credit. It definitely can affect a little bit of it, but this is again only about 15% of our credit score. So just keep those accounts, keep them good, and eventually you'll get into a good spot with our length of credit section. Moving on to our new credit. So we're getting smaller in our credit pie. This is only 10%. So what new credit means, it means that you are applying for a new loan product. So different credit lines that will actually impact your score a little bit. So if you are applying for something, you'll probably see your score drop a few points. It's just because there was, a hit, an inquiry on your credit. There are differences though between those hard hits, the ones that do impact your credit. So that's, when I'm applying for a new credit card, trying to get a loan, and then soft hits. So financial institutions, for example, will probably look at your credit to determine eligibility for a checking account. That's going to be a soft hit. If you're ever unsure, you can ask those differences. The soft hits, you'll see them show up on your report, but it's not going to affect your score. So keep in mind, it includes things such as retail credit cards, and we're not a retail credit card haters over here. Again, I mentioned my Amazon problem. I have an Amazon credit card as well. It makes sense for me, but just be mindful of those kind of different offers they might be having. New credit card is going to be a hit on your credit there.
Hey, Emma, real quick, we had a couple questions.
Oh, yeah.
So the first question is, so if you use your credit card, a ton of them getting thrown in here. So if you use your credit card and pay off amount right away, does it build your credit faster?
It will build credit. I don't know kind of what it would be faster compared to, but that is a fabulous way to utilize credit cards because we have those low balances being reported. And Todd will actually walk us through a slide to talk a little bit more about like reporting dates when it makes sense to pay those credit cards. So again, hate doing this, but hang tight on that. But yeah, put some charges on. You can make a mini charge, like maybe just get like your Netflix subscription, something you're already budgeted for. Pay that off, set it up automatically each month.
And payment history only counts as one payment per month, regardless if you make 15 payments within that month. And so it may not necessarily build it faster because it's still that length of time as well that is going to impact that score. Does it help if you get a credit increased? And I assume this might be if you're at that 50% mark and you might need to increase that balance to lower it. Great question.
Absolutely, it does. Again, be mindful of yourself and your habits. Is increasing your credit limit on those credit cards going to be tempting and get you in a situation where you don't want to be in? It is definitely an option, especially if you are looking for maybe some short term, maybe you're on that cusp of that very good, that 740 credit that's going to get you the best rates. It could definitely help you out there. But again, just be mindful of your own habits. It can be tempting increasing our credit limit. So make sure you're identifying those habits.
What about student loans? How much of a hit is that?
So it's going to depend if you're thinking private or federal. So for federal loans, a credit score is not something that's considered as far as those rates go. But if you are doing a private student loan, then absolutely it would be a hit for the credit.
And then lastly, how many hard hits should you try to have in a year?
The less, the better. We'll talk to, or I guess I didn't really say it. Please don't apply for loan products that you don't need. as far as that goes. So there's not like a limit. Again, it depends a lot. This is where it gets super complicated. We need your report in front of us to kind of see what's already being reported. There are some different score simulators that you can have with credit monitoring tools. We'll share one at the end of class, and it actually does have that option. So you can get your information, play around with some things, but the only apply for credit that you need. So try to keep that as minimal as possible.
Something to also keep in mind too is the time that you utilize to pull your credit is really important. So a good example of that is if you're out there shopping for a car and you got to take a loan out for that vehicle, it is important that you do shop rates and you find the best deal for you. But you do that in a very short period of time. If you do it within a 30-day time frame and every single hit that you have on your credit report is related to getting a vehicle, it won't have as much impact. It will only count as one hit towards your credit report. But if I go out there and I shop today for a car and I don't end up getting one, and then I go next month and I shop for a car again and they pull my credit next month and I don't decide to do it, then I go do it another month after that. Now that time frame of your credit pulls now gets a little bit further and further out, and that might have a negative impact to your credit report. But again, that credit pull isn't the only factor on your credit. There's lots of other things that will also impact your score. Good question.
Thanks for bringing that up, Todd. It's a really good point. Please do some rate shopping. It's good for you.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I think that's it.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So back to our credit pie, switching it up a little bit, but mix of credit. So I kind of already hinted at it. Don't be applying for credit you don't need. I want you to really pay attention that this is really only 10% of our credit score. Having a different mix of credit, so different types of accounts, is of course going to help improve it, but not a major part for as far as the overall breakdown of our credit score. So we already talked a little bit. There's kind of two main types of credit. We hit on the revolving credit. So that is where the total balance due, as well as even that minimum monthly payment, can vary from month to month. These are accounts that can stay open forever. Installment loans, more traditional. You're taking out a set amount and you're going to pay that down following that amortization schedule. So you're paying some interest, paying some principal to get that balance down to zero. Can't necessarily take out more on those installment loans. You would have to do like a refinance or, take out an additional loan if you were needing more funds. So it is good to have different types, but please, again, don't be sitting here thinking, oh, I only have a credit card or a couple credit cards. Maybe I should get a car loan or a personal loan. Again, please don't apply for credit that you don't need. Not as big as a category that I want you to worry too much about. And then someone threw in, how do you raise your credit the fastest? Again, let me actually just go back to, our little credit pie. Payment history and utilization, because those have the largest effect on our credit score. Making payments on time and in full moving forward, as well as paying down any high interest, credit card debt on those revolving lines. That is really going to be the quickest way to improve your score. All right, going back. So awesome. Any more questions on the breakdown as far as that goes? I've been loving the conversation. All right, well, definitely keep them coming through that chat. So this next part, we just kind of wanted to visualize it a little bit. So this is just kind of the difference in what a poor credit score and a good credit score can look like. So we have two people and they're going to buy the same exact car for the same amount of money, and they're doing a 72-month term loan for that auto loan. Fun fact, the most common as far as auto loans go. But we have our person one. So they have been working on improving their credit. They're at that 740, which Todd told us is that A+ range, right? We're going to get the best interest rate possible. So maybe that looks like 4%. And do we have the numbers mixed up here? We do, don't we? Awesome. So I apologize. Just for the monthly payments, we switched it up. So I don't know how that happened, but the monthly payment for that one's actually going to be the $391. So again, we have a low monthly payment. We're only paying about $3,000 as far as interest. Remember, we took $25,000 out for that vehicle. That's how much the purchase price was. We have another person, maybe their credit score isn't so great. Again, some things happened in their lives. The Maybe the interest rate that they're getting, again, they might have a hard time even getting approved, but it's going to be on that higher end. 21% is actually the legal limit for auto loans as far as it goes in Colorado. So there are some regulations around it, but 21%. And again, apologies, they have that 600 payment. So we can see the difference on that monthly. I do think a lot of people focus on that monthly cost. Again, it makes sense, right? You got to figure out how to pay my bills, but want to emphasize to the total cost difference. The person who does not have that great credit score, again, this is the same exact vehicle. Look at how much they're paying extra compared to the other person. So just be mindful again of these things. Again, life happens. You might need loans when your credit score isn't that great. Make sure you're working on building it up so you are able to do a refinance if you do find yourself in that situation. So it can be very impactful. We're not trying to scare you for this. I also like to point out too that this is auto loans, installment loans probably aren't going to be the best first credit product if you are looking to build it. There are a lot of different great options out there. And I'm actually going to pass it back over to Todd to talk about some other great options we have for building our credit, but also ones that can definitely get us into a little bit of trouble if we're not careful with it. And that is the ever famous credit cards.
Absolutely. Thank you. So credit cards can be a phenomenal tool for you to build your credit worthiness and your credit score. With a caveat to that, as long as they are used correctly, we can see, and we historically have seen, that credit cards can get people into some really, really tough places. You heard us talk a little bit about it at the beginning during the budgeting, talking about it now, where if you use credit cards in a not good way where you're living off the credit cards, it can be very expensive and get you into a really tough spot. It negatively impacts your credit score, and then you have a domino effect where your credit score then impacts other areas of what you have in terms of your budget and what your credit score might be pulled for that costs you a little bit more money as you go forward. And so really ensuring that you're using it correctly. One of the questions that you might ask yourself are you paying your bills on time or early? And it's really important for us to reference. Oh, you okay?
Yeah, I switched it. Sorry.
That's okay. That's a great question to see or for you to look at. If you remember back at our pie, 35%, sorry, is it 35% is based on payment history. And so are you making your payments on time or are you not? If you're not making it on time, it could negatively impact your credit report. Generally, you have a grace period with your credit bureaus or with your credit card companies, but if it goes past 30 days on a payment, it negatively impacts your credit report and it will drop your credit score. Credit score has an impact on your interest rate. And so the higher your credit score, especially in credit cards, the higher your interest rate. But digging into that in your credit cards is really important. Understanding what your interest rate is. And if you're carrying balances on your credit cards, you're absolutely paying interest on the amounts that you owe on those credit cards. So looking at what your interest rate might be on that credit card. If your interest rate is 21%, this could potentially be an opportunity for you to explore other credit cards and see if there might be a better interest rate out there somewhere else. Something that you might want to look at is how long it would take you to pay down that balance if you're only making minimum payments. And so if you have that $1,100 credit card and it's telling you that to make sure that your payment is on time, you pay $5. Well, historically, that could take potentially 5 years, on an average, 5 years to pay down a credit card balance. And over the course of that time, you're paying a significant amount of interest towards that credit card as well. And so digging into your interest rate would give you a couple different options. Seeing what your interest rate is, you can explore potentially doing what's called a balance transfer and exploring a 0% interest rate at another credit card company or a lower interest rate for credit card balance transfers that would give you a much lower rate to help you pay that balance down faster. That is if you get yourself into a spot, or maybe you're reviewing your credit report that you currently have and you have those balances and you're trying to get down to that 30% mark to help increase your credit score. that would be one of the things that you could dig into to see what could I do differently to help pay that balance down a little bit faster. You could also use credit cards in a sense of digging into that interest rate. If you did have a purchase that you absolutely needed to make, you could find something that would offer a 0% interest for a certain amount of time and try to pay that off before that interest rate kicks in, and you have that 0% balance for that time for 12 months or 18 months, so you can try to pay it off as soon as possible. Credit cards are a free way to build your credit. If you think about that pie, 35% is made up of payment history, and the other 30% is made up of credit utilization. And credit cards are revolving balances, and the best way for you to lean into that credit utilization. It's based on how much you're paying off on a monthly basis and really trying to stay at or below that 30% mark. And credit cards, because they are line of credits, are the best way to do that. If you pay it off every single month, you avoid paying interest, which saves you money in the long run. And so you can focus on paying that off if you can, and you avoid paying interest.
And Todd, I'm going to cut you off right here super quick. So sorry, we have some questions in the chat.
Okay.
Somebody asked, is a debit card helpful for this too?
A debit card is not tied to your credit in any way. And so it will not necessarily help with building or establishing credit. That is mainly a cash account. And so any activity that's done within your debit card, because it's tied to your checking account, doesn't have any relation back to the credit report or building credit in any way. So unfortunately, that wouldn't be a way to help out with building credit.
I will throw out, there are some, definitely some newer things I've seen. Some institutions are kind of doing some debit cards that act like a line of credit. So that is an option out there. I don't know too much beyond that. I don't even know those company names. So you could definitely look into some of that, but just be mindful, again, understanding kind of how they're doing that reporting. And then Todd, our next question was, does interest help build credit?
Interest doesn't necessarily help build credit. Staying within those percentages on your utilization, is the primary piece that we talk about that helps you build your credit, but paying interest wouldn't have any impact in your actual credit score.
If you're paying off those cards in full, you're not paying a penny in interest, and you're getting all those benefits of that payment history, that low utilization being reported. Somebody threw in the chat too that they use rewards credit cards to get, some money back on it. That's a great way to use our credit cards. And they wanted to know if it was a good idea if they are continuing to pay each month on time. Absolutely. Please. There's lots of, again, credit cards are tools. There's lots of great benefits for that. Find a card that fits your lifestyle to get the most bang for your buck. And then next question too is there a credit card that is best for teens to get to build credit? And with that, I would say depends. Definitely do your research. One thing about being a teenager, the second you turn 18, the credit companies can smell it. They know. So you probably will get a lot of offers, right when you're about that age. Again, as long as we're using the tool correctly, just find one maybe that doesn't have an annual fee, something that's pretty simple. You probably won't get the best rewards. But again, get that plan in place with your child to make sure that they understand how to use the credit card to the best of their ability. So it depends. There's a ton of different starter credit cards for different age groups that you can definitely do some research for. Secured credit card too, through that in the chat, we'll talk about that. Okay, sorry, Todd, cut you off right in the middle of the slide.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing that. And so another thing that is beneficial is what we've been talking about is making sure that you pay your bill on time. So it might impact or reflect on your credit report on how you're wanting that to happen. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here in the next slide. So your credit card company has a billing cycle and a statement cycle. These are two separate things, and it can kind of mess you up if you don't understand or know these two different things. And so we're going to explain it to you. So what the billing cycle is for a credit card is the billing cycle can go from, I'm just going to use an example, the first of the month to the last day of the month, the beginning of the month to the end of the month. What that billing cycle is that's the cycle that any of your credit card activity is being recorded. So if in the month of February, I spent money on my credit card, those charges in February would be from February 1st to February 29th. Any of those charges would then be recorded after that billing cycle has closed. So on February 29th, the last day of the month, the billing cycle would close. That means it ends. That's when I then get a statement from the credit card company. And that's when the statement cycle starts. That is the statement cycle is the gap between when your statement gets cut out and when your payment is actually due for the credit card. So I might get a statement from my credit card company on March 3rd, for example, and my payment would be due on March 15th for that billing cycle. And so if I spent $100 during my billing cycle, I would then get that put onto my statement. They would send that activity to me, and that statement cycle is what I would then start to calculate my percentages off of, is what comes on the statement cycle.
One thing that I do recommend as far as this goes, you can call your creditor and figure out kind of those different dates if they don't have it on the statement. I like to kind of treat my billing cycle end date, so when those balances are being reported, as my due date. So I think I mentioned earlier, try to get early, pay early, pay often on those credit cards. Like I do it every 2 weeks when I get paid. I just pay down that balance, make sure I'm covered there. Because again, even if you are getting close to that credit line, maybe you do have full intent of paying that card completely off, but that higher balance was already sent to the credit reporting agencies because that's when the information is sent.
So generally what will happen is when that billing cycle ends, it's usually at the end of the month, whatever that balance is at the end of the month is what gets reported back to the credit bureaus. And so if you know when your billing cycle ends and when they might be reported, then you're more likely to be able to pay that balance down before it reports so that it reports accurately if you're really focused on trying to stay below that 30%. So in my case, if I spend $100 and I know they're going to report on the 29th of the month when that billing cycle ends, I would go in and pay $70 towards my credit card before that billing cycle ends so that that $30 or that 30% then can be reported back to the credit bureau and you're trying to, and that's where that utilization would come into place. So paying early can definitely help out with that utilization or using Emma's method, building it into your budget so that you pay every time you get paid, you pay your credit cards off or down.
All right, so next up, we did have another engagement side. I am just keeping an eye on time, so feel free to get in and do the mentee. But Todd, if you just kind of want to talk to us through whether these things are do's or don'ts with our credit cards.
Okay. So for the do we treat your credit card like a debit card, meaning only use your card for what you have budgeted for the month and know that you can pay off. Don't try not to use your card as an emergency fund. It is really important that you don't think about using your credit card. Sorry. You want to use your, do you or do you not want to use your credit card as an emergency fund? Do you want to treat your credit card as extra income, or do you not want to use it as extra income? You want to leave a small balance to help your score? Do you not want to leave a small balance to help your score? And should you know the balance, or do you not want to know the balance or limit or interest rate? Got some answers. So it's kind of a little bit of a review. You want to treat your card like a debit card? Maybe, maybe not. Kind of depends if you have some self-control there. Do you want to Do you have the ability to pay it back or are you using your debit card and your credit card at the same time? Do you want to use your card as emergency fund? Yes, just keeping it in the drawer until you absolutely need it. It's probably a good idea.
Just be mindful again. We talked a little bit about emergency savings, so don't have your credit card be your emergency savings backup plan. Definitely that last resort.
Absolutely.
And then we know our credit cards, they aren't extra income. So again, we want to only put on the card what we can charge off. And then let's talk a little bit about the balances kind of being reported. This one I would say is actually a little inconclusive. You truly do not need to have a balance being reported on those credit cards. I think that is a huge myth. You might hear some advice to keep $10, keep $20. That's not necessarily true. Even if you're making those payments on time and in full, because remember, our statement date when credit cards are being reported is not necessarily that due date. Around that time frame, it's a little bit different. As long as it's being reported as a payment on time, you will see your score. You can always check on your credit report. I know for me, there's a line of credit that I no longer use, and I still have check marks for payment history on that, even though I'm not using it. So dealer's choice, I guess I would say that I don't know if carrying a small balance would necessarily increase your score. I just don't think it's necessary as far as paying for interest. And then yes, know those balances. Again, we got to be mindful of our overall utilization, know what those limits are, and then interest rates. So be mindful of your credit cards. If anything, just take a mental note of your credit card that has the lowest interest rates. So if you have an emergency come up, then you know which card that it would make the most sense to go on for that. But thanks for sharing, everyone. Get back to the presentation.
Cool. So how long does information stay on your credit report? And this is really good for you to know because some of these things definitely can negatively impact your credit report. Generally, if you have any type of inquiries, you go and pull your credit report somewhere. Those will usually stay on your credit report for about 2 years at the most, and can impact your credit score for that 2-year time frame. And so really, as you are applying for different new credit, anytime you apply for that new credit, as a reminder, it does have an inquiry on your credit report, and that inquiry then can stay for 2 years. If you have a late payment on your credit report, negative information, something that might be reporting negatively, it could stay on your credit report for up to 7 years, and impact your score there. And so really being mindful of, if you do have those payments and you're getting close to those due dates, do what you can to at least make those minimum payments. Oh, someone's screen went black. Bankruptcies can stay on your credit report for a long period of time, depending on which chapter of bankruptcy you file for. Chapter 13 could stay for 7 years. Chapter 7 could stay on there for 10 years. Another thing with the 10 years is, if you have positive stuff on your credit report, it can impact your score for up to 10 years. And so if you had something that you've paid off, like a credit card, it can stay on there for 10 years. And so, if you do good things on your credit report, they can stay. Sometimes those negative things can also impact your score for a longer period of time as well. All right, so I'm going to go through this one a little quick. I know we've got only 6 minutes left, but this is really, credit cards are a great way to build your credit report. There's not a right card for anyone. As you all know, you probably receive stuff in the mail every single time you go and open up your mailbox. You hear ads everywhere that you go. There's no right credit card for anyone. It's really about what might be right for you. Each credit card offers a little bit of a different value. Some credit cards, as I've heard mentioned in the chat, rewards points. People like to earn rewards points. I might use credit to build up rewards points so that our family can take a trip next year. or I might save up those rewards points to buy Christmas gifts at the end of the year. That is a great way to utilize those credit cards. Some credit cards offer a cashback option. You can cash out money to put towards savings or to potentially pay down a bill, or utilize for different things that you might want that cashback option for. There's credit cards out there if you're just looking to simply just build credit without all the extra things. There might not have rewards points, but it, just giving you the option to have a credit line so that you have something to then build up your credit report. There's credit cards out there that have lower interest rates. So if you do carry a balance on the credit card, you're not paying as high of an interest rate on that credit card if you need to potentially have some type of purchase. But also really keep in mind, there are credit cards that do not have annual fees, and there's credit cards that have annual fees. And those annual fees can vary and fluctuate. They can be $25 a year up to $200, $300 a year. And so really paying attention to the annual fees and what the benefits might offer to you. Secured credit and secured credit is a great way to build up your credit. A secured card would mean that you put money into a savings account or a CD and it's held there. Instead of the bank lending you money, you're lending yourself money and utilizing your own money to build up your credit, which is a great way to build up your credit as well. And as always, stick to your budget and stay on top of your payments. It is so important, and that is the best way to build up your credit report, is to ensure that you're paying things on time all the time. And if you do not, it can definitely create a snowball or a domino effect in other ways. And so just continue to make your payments on time and early.
And we'll just breeze through this slide super quick. We'll also make sure to throw this into the chat. So we've talked a lot about credit reports, what's being reported. Annualcreditreport.com. That's the one website I want you to keep in mind. That is the only free source for credit reports, and it's authorized through the federal government. So really good to be checking. We recommend staggering out requests kind of throughout the year to get that year-long credit monitoring. But typically you get one free report from each bureau for all 3 years. In COVID, they started offering weekly free pulls, and that's still the case. I don't know if it's going away, but pull your credit reports from all 3 bureaus and get a good look on what's being reported for that. So with that, and I know there were some questions in the chat. Zach is being amazing. He's going to jump in and get us some answers to those questions. Again, just want to be mindful of time. We're going to dive into kind of our next little trivia section. So give you all another second to get signed back in for that. And then we will share that credit monitoring tool as well to actually see your credit score. All right, I'll give it another couple seconds. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So our first question for our credit section is, anything above this credit score is considered A+ credit and will give you the best rates. Coming in quick with those ones. Fabulous job. So again, that's for that standard FICO scoring range, but 740 and above, that's going to get you the best rates possible. Anything above that is just bragging rights and a little bit of room for error. All right, our next question for credit. Which category has the biggest impact on our credit score? We talked about 5. Awesome job. Yay. Yes. So that payment history, right? We're making our payments on time and in full. Right? We'll get to see our leaderboard, kind of the halfway point for our credit session, see where we're at. So I got Vote Goat in the lead. All right, so carrying a balance of 50% of your available revolving credit will build our credit. Is that true or false? So that was false. So just a reminder, kind of that credit utilization. We want to keep our balances being reported from month to month at 30% or less than our available credit. That 30 to 50 range, again, that's that neutral zone. We're looking above that 50%. That's when it can negatively impact our score. All right, last question for our trivia winner. What are the 3 credit reporting bureaus? We talked about that at the beginning of our class. Try to get a little tricky with the word. Yep, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. So again, annualcreditreport.com, that's where you can see what's being reported for all 3 of those bureaus. All right, let's get our trivia winner, and then we'll share that credit monitoring tool with you all. All right, so it was Vote Goat again. Did we want to go with second place? I don't know what we want to do in this situation. We didn't talk about this. Congratulations, though.
Great job, Boko. I think
Yeah, I
will
would go
second place.
Kelsey, great job, but let's give the second place a gift card. Yeah.
So second place was Thinker. Who was Thinker? If you'd like, you can go ahead and send Zach your name in a direct message. Oh, Melissa Davis, it looks like. Great job, Melissa.
Yay.
Awesome job.
So apologies if it was adding any points from the last round. I thought I got that set up correctly. So my bad if that threw anyone off. But wanted to end today again. We will definitely hang out to answer any other questions that might come in. Here is a credit monitoring tool. So this is actually free. It's offered through Ent. You do not need to have an account with us to get signed up. You can scan that QR code, or ent.com/yourcredit is where you go. It shows you your credit score, kind of shows you the ranges as well as where you're where you're at in all those different categories. It can give you some personalized advice and where to increase your score. It has that score simulator. So thank you everyone for today. This was such a fabulous session. Again, some great conversations. I will definitely get that link into the chat. But if there's anything else, again, we'll hang out here for a couple more minutes.
Yes, thank you guys so much. That was awesome and so much great information. I love your sessions. I always take